And good evening and welcome to this amazing Yamaha sponsored and endorsed webinar with the superstar, otherwise known as Mr. Callum Au. Very nice. Hello, everybody. How are you doing at home?
Good.
Yeah, very nice. I like the way they're all just thumbsing up because we're on Zoom. But Callum, this is...
Yes, I know.
It's nice that you can join us today. Your webinar is with a band called the Screaming Kicks Big Band, part of the Hot House Music Schools network. And we're really excited to hear a little bit about what you do, the journey that you've had to get where you are. And I think maybe if we're lucky, some of the kids will be having some questions prepped and they'll get to ask you them as we go. So this is part of our Vox Talks, and we're very grateful to Jeremy Smith and the whole team at Yamaha Band and Orchestra for making this happen, because during lockdown, it's absolutely super important that we give the kids and the pupils a reason to be excited and look forward and be optimistic to the future. So we really appreciate this. And if it's okay with you, Callum, if you wouldn't mind telling everybody at home, what do you do? Who are you?
Sure. Well, I kind of do three things in broad terms. I'm a composer, I'm an arranger, and I'm a trombone player. And I have done various work for all sorts of people. I'm quite fortunate to be one of the trombonists in the Ronnie Scott's Jazz Orchestra. That's sort of my main playing gig. Other than that, I kind of do things like the Echoes of Ellington Big Band, various big bandy and sort of more jazzy stuff. I've got a quintet I run called Quintet with a great trumpet player called James Davison. As an arranger, I've done all sorts of things really. I do, most pertinently to the big band stuff, I guess, I've done most of, if not all of, in fact, the arranging for the great high note trumpet superstar Louis Dowdeswell. I've also done some writing for Jamie Cullum, for the BBC Concert Orchestra, for the film Cats, which is one that we shouldn't talk about very much because that didn't go down so well. But yes, various things like that. I guess that's a sort of very, very short biography.
Wow, man, it sounds amazing. So if you don't mind, we can break a few of those things down so that people can get a better idea of what you do. Did you go to a music college on the trombone?
No, I didn't. I never went to a music college. I kind of learned pretty much everything. First things first, I had a really great teacher on the trombone to start me off, a chap called Terry Reaney. He was an old pro up north. He lived in Blackpool, which is where I grew up, believe it or not. He was formerly of the Sid Lawrence Orchestra. He was one of their trumpet soloists when the band was super busy and on the road all the time. And he retired to Blackpool, where he lived with his wife and where his kids and now great grandkids are. But he was the peripatetic teacher at my school, so I was super lucky to have him start me off. But I guess the beginnings of my sort of serious professional music education came in NYJO, the National Youth Jazz Orchestra. So yeah, I sort of learned everything from there and from other people, and more or less on the job in a sort of slightly more traditional way, you might say.
So you did I get this right? You're actually from Blackpool, is that right?
Yep. Wow. Yep.
I never knew. And I think there's actually a really good scene up in Blackpool and Southport and that. There's quite a lot of music.
There were a lot of kind of really great semi-pro, either good amateurs, semi-pros or pros in that area. Lots of retired ones as well, because back when Blackpool was, of course, a really busy holiday destination, it needed tons of professional musicians. So every kind of theatre, every ballroom would have had its own orchestra, and there would have been, when I say orchestra, I mean band with sort of 12, 13 people in it, but there would have been kind of 50 of those in Blackpool just itself. So yeah, Blackpool is a place that does have a lot of musicians, so you might be surprised nowadays.
Really surprised. And actually, I'm thinking, when did you start learning the trombone, and when did you make that jump to Nigel? That's kind of a key point in your education.
So I started playing. I must have been about 8 or 9. It was year 4 in school. So however old you are in year 4, that's how old I was. And the school had a few brass instruments kind of given to it. They just sort of turned up. There was a tenor horn, there was a baritone horn, and there was a trombone. And I was given the trombone because you probably can't tell on Zoom, but I'm quite a tall chap. And when I was a child, I was quite a tall child. And out of the class of, 25 people or whatever it was, I was pretty much the only one who could go and reach the 6th position. So that was that set. I had already kind of played the piano a bit, and I enjoyed that, but I really, really took to the trombone, mainly because, well, firstly, it's much easier than the piano, but secondly, and a bit more importantly, it's a much more sociable instrument. It's an instrument that, to be quite frank, doesn't really sound that good just on its own in isolation. You can't really have, I don't think anyone's queuing up to go and hear solo trombone recitals, or not very many people are anyway. But when you put it into a larger ensemble context, like an orchestra or a big band or whatever, you get a really great feeling of being sort of one part among many, and being, being part of a much larger thing. And I really enjoyed that a lot more than sort of playing on my own at home, which even as a young child, I sort of didn't quite grasp the point of.
So when did you move to Nigel, and did you used to commute to Nigel from Blackpool?
Now, I did my first gig with Nigel. I was probably 16, I think. And Bill Ashton called me up kind of out of the blue to go and do something in, where was it? Somewhere in the north of England, where they were down someone at the last minute, and they needed someone to sort of fill in. And he'd heard of me from, I think he'd heard of me through Terry via Andy Wood, I think. I went and did that gig on no preparation, and was, I'd never done a rehearsal, but I was completely out of my depth. But it was really great, and I had a really great experience and wanted to do more of it. So over the next kind of couple of years, I did a few more things with the band, but I only really started going regularly when I went to university. And I went to Oxford, and the commute from there is quite easy. So it's about an hour on the train or something. So I would go to the rehearsals on Saturday mornings then, and probably a year or so after I started at Oxford, I was playing the first trombone chair. I had a great time in the interim, actually, sitting next to John Stokes, who is a wonderful trombonist. I still see quite a lot of him on various things, but he was, he's probably about 7 or 8 years older than me, maybe something around about there. But at the time, he was the best trombonist I'd ever heard in my life. Still is one of them, to be honest. But at the time, he was literally the best person I'd ever heard. And I learned so much from kind of hearing him play and listening to how he would sort of do things. And I think that's mostly how I sort of developed, really, picking things up from other people.
Did you, to join the journey up from Nigel to Yamaha, did you do anything else, like maybe any musical theatre, West End depping, or was it all TV or radio? Is it a bit of everything, or was it really just jazz all the way through that brought you to Yamaha?
It's a portfolio career with any professional musician. When I was probably it was my last year at university, Pete Long, the great sax clarinet player who runs the Ronnie Scott's Jazz Orchestra, came into Nigel, and we did a Dizzy Gillespie project. playing things like A Night in Tunisia and Good Bait and that sort of thing with Pete as the musical director, and with a group of dancers who kind of set dance things to all of these pieces. And through that, I got to know Pete, and eventually, through a lucky happenstance, there happened to be a chair going in the Ronnie Scott's Jazz Orchestra at that time, which he eventually, I kind of started doing. So that became my sort of major playing gig. And when I say major playing gig, just to manage expectations here, at the moment the band's doing almost nothing, but even pre-COVID, the band would probably only have 30 to 40 dates a year. So it's not by any means a full-time job, but it was a big outlet, and it was a place where I got to know a lot of other people, crucially. So what I said about John Stokes a minute ago applies like 10 times more to Andy Flaxman, who's the principal trombone, who continues to be the principal trombone in the Ronnie's band to this day. And through sitting next to him and listening to the way he played stuff, that was just a whole different experience to anything I'd sort of previously had at that stage. And I'd met loads of other people through doing that band, great players like Alistair White, Trevor Myers, Nicole Thompson, Andy Wood, Chris Dean, all these people who I sort of then kind of got to know informally. And through that sort of process, as you said a minute ago, you end up doing other things when these people are either unavailable or they can't be bothered or whatever. You know, I've done a few different West End shows as Deps. I've never been a chair holder because it's not really my sort of thing to do full time, but I've done plenty of sort of TV. It's always on the big band side. I don't play classical stuff really at all. So I don't do any of the sort of major film sessions unless that film happens to have a big band in it, and then I might. But yeah, I've sort of done stuff like that among those things. And then Louis's band sort of came along maybe 5-6 years ago when we just started putting these little videos together for the internet, which is this new popular thing that everyone seems to be on about nowadays. And I believe that's how we came to the attention of Yamaha, because those videos have quite a large reach, and I'm really glad that we did, because they make absolutely fantastic horns, and I'm really enjoying playing it.
I think that's amazing. In fact, Stu just messaged through saying he's got a good question. Stu, over to you.
Yeah, this is, well, it's a bit of a an adaptation of one that Jono sent through earlier, because he was asking about, obviously he knows you play with the Ronnie's band, but we weren't aware that you went to Oxford actually, which is very cool.
Right.
We just wondered, well, the question was kind of about like, how did you get into the Ronnie's thing? But obviously you've answered that with meeting Pete at the Niger and stuff. And it was more about when you were at uni, did you feel the networking was a really important part to getting where you are now, really?
That's an interesting, yeah, that's a really interesting question. It's a good question, Jono. So meeting other musicians is completely crucial, both in terms of what you're going to learn from them. I've already mentioned Andy Flaxman and John Stokes as two people I've learned loads from, but you know, every single good player that you play with will up your game and make you better if you listen to them, if you take from them the sort of things that you really like about what they're doing. It's important from that perspective. Just irregardless of anything else, you're going to get a lot out of just meeting people, because you get to hear and you get to interact with new musicians, which is super important in the context of someone who wants to broaden their musical horizons. More pragmatically, yes, I think that without knowing other people, you will really struggle to get, if you're the best bass player in the world or whatever, and you spend your whole life in your basement practicing the bass, no one's ever going to hear you, no one's ever going to listen to you, and you're never going to be playing the bass in public, because you have to meet people. Music, unless you're Keith Jarrett, and you're a kind of solo piano superstar, music is not played on your own most of the time. Or you could be Jacob Collier and be able to play every instrument yourself. But for the most part, music is not played on your own. Music is played with other people. So yeah, meeting other people and the networking element is a huge, huge part of that.
Why did you go to Oxford, Callum? That's an interesting choice. A lot of these guys, I mean, apart from the fact your advice applies to everything, I mean, if you want to be a great scientist, you've got to surround yourself with great scientists. You never want to be the most intelligent person in the room. Always be surrounded by people who have got more intelligence, because that lifts your game. But, why Oxford? Was that a music degree or was that a science degree? Where did you go?
No, I did a classics degree. It's essentially Latin, Greek, and philosophy. Specializing in philosophy, and I did that for a couple of reasons. Firstly, and sort of most importantly, I think that if you can, you should, because music is something that you cannot be certain of. And just to be a bit brutal and a bit pragmatic now, I could be the world's greatest trombone player. I'm not, but I could be. And then tomorrow I could fall down the stairs, I could knock my front teeth out, and then that would be the end. And as a musician, you don't have any sort of job security. You don't have any sort of kind of sick leave or pensions or that kind of thing, that other than what's provided by the state, which is very, very little. So if you are able to at all, I'd recommend that sort of thing. There are some other benefits that I can kind of go into in a minute that I sort of found out myself. But secondly, at the time that I was applying to the music colleges, and I don't think this is necessarily true now, but certainly at the time, it wasn't exactly clear what I would have done at a music college, because I was not, the sort of high levels of the classical technique side of things. I'd never really been a classical player. I did my grade 8 and stuff, but I was never kind of that interested in playing in orchestras or playing kind of the classical solo rep. So really, I wouldn't have got onto any of the straight courses, or if I did, I would have scraped in by the skin of my teeth and had to work incredibly hard just to kind of get to the middle of the pack, I think. The jazz courses were something else that I did consider, but I didn't really like the idea of them because they were so focused, so laser focused on small group improvised jazz. And while I quite liked small group improvised jazz, and I still do quite like it, I didn't want that to be the only thing that I would be doing with my time or my energy. I really wanted a little bit broader of a thing, so it sort of put me off that idea like that. But yes, that's sort of my vague answer to why I chose to go there, and I'm still happy I did, because I think it did come with a lot of benefits that you don't necessarily get at a music college, aside from the degree, which is always nice to be able to fall back on if things go terribly wrong.
I think that's a really cool answer, actually, because I mean, for some people who might be listening at home, they might be thinking, well, I can still go into music even if I go and do a science degree. If it's the right, there's no deadline, there's no sort of timeline for doing music. And also, I don't know how it is, but obviously a lot of young people have parents who perhaps don't understand music as a career, and they'll be thinking we want them to go and do science or maths or something like that. So they've got something there, and it just shows that we have all been in that same position. I personally am quite interested with the Oxford University bit, because one of our alumni is a professor there, Professor Stephen Graal, who
oh right,
I don't know if you ever met him, but he does all of the.
I don't think so. What's his subject?
And he did a lot of music there, obviously. And he recorded all the Harry Potter film scores. He was the guy who conducted all
Right.
a really great guy. I don't suppose you ever did the Oxford University Jazz Orchestra varsity competitions with Cambridge, did you?
I don't think I did. I ran the Oxford Uni. There's this weird kind of. I'm not even going to go into it because it's stupid. But there was this weird situation while I was at Oxford where there were 3 student big bands all at the same time, and the University Jazz Orchestra was one of them, and I was in the other one. I was in the University Big Band. It's a bit kind of People's Front of Judea, which is something that none of the kids will probably get. Running the University Big Band and playing in it was actually one of the best things that I did in terms of learning about my own career at Oxford, because the stuff that I had to do was well in advance of anything that I would have had to do at a music college, because obviously when you're at a music college, you're being tutored in how to play in a big band. I had to run it. So I was sort of juggling how to book gigs, how to get people to show up, how to take the band away on a tour, how to tell people who maybe were good players, but who didn't really know, because we had a lot of classical brass players in that band, not who were great classical trumpet players, classical trombonists, but who didn't necessarily know how to play in the correct style. So kind of the way to verbalize how to get that message across and how to tell them, what various articulations mean and how to train the band into playing in a really tight sort of unit. I learned all that stuff in that year, which I don't think I would have had a similar opportunity anywhere else.
I completely agree, and I did it myself at university for undergrad, postgrad, and masters. And I finished at Cambridge, and it was that was a real learning process, leading it. And you've done this, and you've gone on to become now obviously a Yamaha artist. And once we're here about that, what was it like getting that phone call, or was it a bit more organic? Just on the back of a gig at one of Louis your gigs. How did that happen?
It was fairly recent, actually. Well, I say fairly recent. Everything from slightly before pandemic seems like it was fairly recent, even though it's over a year ago now, if you can believe that. But I spoke to Jeremy after a gig that was basically the last gig we all did, about kind of signing on. He'd been interested in getting me on board for quite a while, and I'd sort of been interested as well, but I really needed to try the horns out before I could sort of commit, because ultimately that's what it's about. It's about being comfortable with the instrument you're playing. You don't want to play something that you're not happy with. And basically on this gig, it was all sponsored by Yamaha, put on in a ballroom somewhere in central London, just sort of immediately before everything got shut down, which was a bit of a shame. But I played the horn. They'd sent me it a few weeks earlier, but that was the first time I played it sort of on a full-on gig, and I just really, really enjoyed it, and how it responded and how the whole thing plays just up and down the register. It's super smooth, super clear, and it doesn't require any extra effort of you. And kind of before that point, I've been playing these vintage Kings, which I still have a few of. King 2Bs from the 1940s-ish, which are, the King 2B is always the archetypal jazz trombone. It's what Tommy Dorsey played. It's what Glenn Miller played. It's Frank Rossellino, I believe, was a King player. It was sort of the gold standard of that time. And I loved those horns, but they're just not as consistent. They're just not as easy to blow, and they're just not as kind of, I've really noticed it actually going into the pandemic, because I'd have both my horns out on the stand, and I'd be recording with them, because that's all we get to do in those first 3 months, is record things and put them in split screen videos for everyone. And I really noticed that even just looking at the wave files, how different the Yamaha looks in terms of it's much more consistent and much more even across the range than the King, which will still really go, and it's still a beautiful instrument. But this horn here, which is just off shot, certainly has the edge.
Well, I think that's probably a good time to ask if you wouldn't mind playing it a little bit, so we could have a quick listen, maybe just something short. It doesn't have to be too much. I mean,
yeah, of course.
That the for Yamaha is one of our alumnus. So a guy called Jeremy Smith used to be with us a long time ago, and he went to Leeds Music College with a repairing degree. And I think actually the musical family that there is around the country, you don't have to necessarily be in music and playing for a living. There are lots of other ways, you know, the writing, the arranging, the gigging, the fixing, the lot. So this is, you know, it's a really nice career to be in if you can find the right people. So you're up for it, Callum. I'd love to hear something.
Yeah, absolutely. You'll have to just bear with me if the mic level is bad. I'll adjust it because I'm obviously using the same mic for talking and playing. How's that?
Sounds good to me.
Okay, great. Okay, what shall I play then?
Could do it with Fraser. Oh, Fraser! No, I'm teasing Fraser at home. Sorry.
Let's play.
Beautiful.
Outrageously good. It sounds incredible, man. It's absolutely amazing. I've never heard trombone sound like that, Fraser. I know he's listening back home, and I'm thinking, wow, the trombone sounds beautiful and so sweet and controlled. Oh, man, that's really... I think Stu was trying to signal me saying that we've got a question about gigging. Have we got one over there?
Yeah, we've got a really good one actually just come through from Jono. I don't know if Jono wants to turn his mic on, and maybe you could ask Callum this one, Jono, the one you've just texted me.
Yeah, I was wondering where you see the kind of the jazz industry going sort of post COVID, and maybe while we're sort of on the tail end of it now, we can't gig in the same way. Whether some of that will carry forward to gigging in the future, or whether we'll go completely back to normal, or sort of do a blend of what we're doing now compared to what we used to do.
Oh, well, I hate to make predictions because they usually turn out to be wrong, but I think that things that were bad before and that were only sticking around because of kind of convention, I don't think will come back. So, for example, one thing that used to happen pointlessly beforehand was people would sort of fly halfway around the world for a 90-minute meeting and then fly back home. I don't think that's ever going to come back. And similar things apply with gigging. I think we'll be a lot more local for a lot longer. You know, with the Ronnie's band, we used to go to various places around Europe and around the rest of the world occasionally, and I would be very surprised if people go back to that for a long time, or if even at all, because what has been discovered is that doing things locally is possible, and it is something that people are much more interested in doing. That said, it's a lot of the theatres and the jazz clubs. It's an economic problem. So a lot of the places, especially in London, which is where I live and work, the way they are sort of set up, they require a reasonably full house, sort of 75, 80% full, just to kind of break even on their costs. So while you can't have that, while there's social distancing measures in place and you can't have more than, say, 40, 50% capacity, I can't see any of those places opening up, or if they do, it's going to be on much different terms to how it was before. That said, in the long term, I don't think we're going to suffer from this forever. I think that eventually, once everyone's vaccinated and once people sort of stop kind of caring as much, I guess, I think things will eventually return to something which is not quite the same, but isn't too far different. That'd be my uneducated guess.
That's amazing.
Yeah, very good.
Thanks, Jono.
Just on the back of that as well, just from me, Callum, this is a question for me, but obviously COVID. I just wondered what was your sort of favorite gig? Have you got a favorite gig or a favorite person that you've worked with? And then also as well, we've had in sort of your favorite. I know you do a lot of arranging, so I don't know if you've got sort of a favorite arranger that you like to almost model yourself on, or take a lot of inspiration from. So.
Okay, so my favorite gig, I can give you a specific and a general example. My favorite general gig to play is my quintet, which I run with James Davison, who's a wonderful young trumpet player, a little bit younger than me. Sounds exactly like Clark Terry. And we do a kind of trumpet trombone front line with just a standard jazz rhythm section. And we have some kind of ground rules that we have established with this band. And the first one is that solos should be kept short enough that people don't fall asleep. The second is that the music shouldn't be miserable. And the third is that all of the tunes have to be tunes. They have to have a discernible melody that somebody could sort of sing along to at the end of the night. And that band is such good fun, partly because of the music, partly because of the nature of it. You know, as a trombonist, to have that much featured sort of solo space is a real rarity, but partly because of the musicians involved as well. Every single one of them, it's a piano player called Sam Watts, Matt Skelton, the great drummer, and Misha Mullavabardo, the bass player, and they're all just fantastically kind of cohesive, and they sort of think and play in the same way, and it just sounds great. So that's my favorite general gig. My favorite specific gig, and this is just something that always comes to mind when I get asked this question, was a gig that we did with Richard Pite at the Cadogan Hall. It must have been 3 or 4 years ago now. And playing first trombone was Chris Dean, who is the musical director from the Sid Lawrence Orchestra. Now, I was just sat in the section with Chris, who is, Chris is an older chap, I'm sure he wouldn't mind me saying that. I think he's about 72-ish, 73, but he's got a real pedigree and has worked with, like, literally Frank Sinatra, literally Ella Fitzgerald. He's worked with all the great kind of top artists, and the gig at the Cadogan Hall was actually playing Frank Sinatra's music, though obviously not with Frank Sinatra, because he wouldn't do particularly well at this stage. And I just remember hearing Chris play that stuff and just hearing how just incredible he sounded, and being like, have a real buzz after that gig. And then there was something else, a favorite arranger. That's a hard one because I like all sorts of different things, but I'll give you a few. I like Vince Mendoza. I like Nelson Riddle. I like Billy May. And I like Maria Schneider. There you go. There's 4 that I really like, who I think are worth, and Gordon Goodwin, there's a 5th. I think that's a really wide, diverse range of styles and sort of things. And I think that in terms of getting to grips with arranging and learning about how to sort of work in different styles, the important thing to do is try and get a grasp on and listen to as much different stuff as you possibly can, so that you understand how various different types of music work. You know, there's a whole world of music that I, for one, have no idea about just yet, but I'm always curious. I'm always interested in hearing new stuff and finding out about new types of music and new grooves, new percussion instruments, new that sort of thing that you can incorporate into what you do.
Very cool. I'm just wondering, because obviously I remember the album with Claire Martin and Claire T, and also the stuff that you do with Louis. How did you get there as a composer? When did you start writing? When did you really think this is something that I can do and I can commercialize and I can make a bit of a gig out of it?
I did a bit of writing at school for sort of GCSEs and things, and for A levels, and that was all sort of well and good. And I just fiddle around with. I had what was the old software called? I had Finale 2000 on my computer, which was an illegal copy that I downloaded on my dad's computer without telling him, and I'd sort of mess around with that and kind of program things in, but I really didn't know what I was doing. It was all just sort of complete guesswork. When I went to NIJO, when I went to NIJO and was going regularly, I was really fortunate because at the time, Bill Ashton, who was the band's founder and musical director, he wrote songs as well. He must have written hundreds of songs over the years, and he was always looking for new arrangements of these songs, which he'd ask people in the band to do. He'd just ask anyone in the band to volunteer to do it. And over the course of my time with NIJO, I think I must have written about 100 charts for the band over probably 4 or 5 years in total. And there's nothing like that as a trial by fire to force you to get better quickly, because I guess the first bit of writing I did wouldn't have been very good at all. I think if I went back to the NIJO pad and I looked at some of the stuff I'd written for them, I'd be horrified. But the tail end of the stuff I've written, I still kind of take out on gigs nowadays. I'm still very happy with it. So yeah, it was really that. It was writing loads and loads of music, loads of different charts for Bill, that sort of pushed me down that route. And then having got to know various people in the band and being recommended for things from having done that, other job opportunities sort of came up, and I ended up moving down that sort of road.
That's very good. I'm just wondering, how long does it take you to do an arrangement now? If somebody phoned you up and said, look, I need an arrangement for the weekend of T for Two or something, is that the sort of thing you could pull out quite quickly, or is it a much longer process?
It really depends. Like everything in life, there's a variety of factors that go into how long it's going to take. If you called me up and you said, I need an arrangement of T for Two, I need it to be a cha-cha, I need it to be the form of an 8-bar intro, 2 choruses with a tag on the end, and very, very specific guidelines, then yes, I can do that very quickly, because the kind of parameters that have been, basically the more specific the parameters are, the quicker I can work. And I think that would probably hold true for most arrangers who have their fundamentals down. Obviously, if someone gave me a specific brief and it was writing an arrangement with parameters that just fell outside of my area of expertise, let's say someone asked me to write some, I don't know, tabla music for kind of Indian percussion, which I know nothing about. I like it. I've listened to some of it, but I don't have the first clue. If I were to take on that job, which I probably wouldn't unless I was either being paid an outrageous amount of money or I was being pressured for some reason into doing it, I would have to spend a lot of time getting really immersed in that style and learning about that style before I'd feel comfortable doing it. So obviously that adds a huge amount on top of the time that it takes. But if in areas where I'm comfortable, in areas where I've got my sort of fundamentals together, I feel like I can do things pretty quickly. So if you sent me a big band thing to do, and you gave me kind of specific guidelines like I just said, I'd probably do it in 8 hours, that sort of general time frame. It's about a day's work.
That's very cool. Obviously, I'm just going to give the guys who are in the band now a bit of a warning that we're coming up to the Q&A section. So Tessa,
Great.
George and that, we're looking forward to hearing your questions. Maybe Macy's got one as well, and Ollie Young. I'm looking forward to hearing all of these because this is over to you to make the most of, Callum. Just the last little bit from me, Callum. I'm thinking, you know, writing for strings and recording strings is one of the greatest things that I ever got. You know, I ever really got chance when I was doing my masters and things. I loved that process. Is that something that sticks with you? Did you enjoy that?
Oh yeah, I love doing that. I've done a few. I mean, when I write for an orchestra, which I do a fair bit, there's always a string section. But I've been lucky enough to do a few projects with a kind of bespoke, hand-picked string group, which are always just great fun, because rather than working with an orchestra where you don't really get to know the musicians in the orchestra because there are so many of them and there's a weird kind of hierarchy dynamic going on there that I don't quite get. When you're working sort of more closely with specific individuals, you can really kind of get to know their playing and you can get to know what they like and what they don't like. My dad is a pretty good amateur violinist. And we always had violins around the house. My sister plays the violin too, though not professionally. So I always had sort of some idea of how stringed instruments sounded and what they could do, but I never had any interest in playing them myself. I've got very fat fingers, and I didn't think that it would be something that would be suited to my kind of physiology. But I'd say that what really got me into the string side of things was a project. I mentioned it briefly earlier on. We're actually streaming this gig from Ronnie's in a couple of months. It was a project with the great male vocalist Matt Ford, who wanted to recreate the Sinatra album Close to You, which is a beautiful album for string quartet and harp and jazz rhythm section and a couple of soloists. So there's French horn on some of it, there's some trumpet on some of it, there's some flute and clarinet and saxophones and all that stuff. I really got to know the players in that quartet, the Tippett Quartet, and particularly their leader, John Mills, who's just a wonderful player. And sort of all the mistake in the same way that I'd been making mistakes with the Nigel stuff, but quite a long time earlier. Exactly the same process with them, and they were all very patient and helpful. But when it came to recording the Claire Martin album, Songs and Stories, which was my project for the last couple of years, actually, immediately pre-pandemic, it was a natural choice to get John to lead the section and to help me out with that side of things. And I just think he's a wonderful player. He plays a couple of little solos on I Get Along Without You Very Well and on Don't Like Goodbyes. There's quite a lot of little John moments and it's just great.
really cool. And the Tippett Quartet are world famous. They are one of the best. Tippett was one of those composers that I had to study when I did my first classical undergrad degree. So happy memories. I remember when Matt Ford was recording that with you, I was working for the Love Music Trust up in Cheshire at the time with a good friend of Matt Ford, a guy called John Barber, who's also a very, very talented Bowdens, and he was just blown away with the musicality of the Tippett Quartet. They were just sensational. Right, over to the Q&A.
Yeah.
Tessa, if you've got a question, I would love you to come on the mic and say hi to Callum and fire away.
Oh, hi. Hi there, Callum. I was just wondering.
Hi, Tessa.
Hello. Who influences you the most and why?
Oh, I mean, I think that there's two answers to this question. In terms of my kind of musical heroes, it's people like I mentioned earlier, Nelson Riddle, Vince Mendoza, Johnny Mandel, John Williams, people who I just really look up to, and Gordon Goodwin. These sorts of people who are just spectacular writers in their own right, and who frankly I end up stealing a lot from when I'm arranging things for people. But in terms of like who has influenced me the most personally in terms of my development as a musician, it's the other musicians who I work with. And it's particularly the people who have had a really outsized influence are the first people I've worked with who are enough better than me in a certain way that I've just learned an enormous amount from them. So all of my sort of peers at NIJO, I would have learned loads of things from them. People like Tom Walsh, Lucas Dodd, George Hogg, Freddie Gavita, all my colleagues in the Rolling Scots Jazz Orchestra, like Andy Flaxman, Sam Main, Robin Asplund, these people who just have years and years of experience. Andy's in his early 60s now, so he's been around the block a few times, and he really, really knows his way around the trombone. So, I think that you can get a lot out of listening to recordings and learning from kind of super famous people. You can also get possibly even more just learning from the people who are immediately around you, and what you might not have in sort of this star appeal thing, whatever that is. You have more than made up for in proximity and in just the sheer amount you can learn from someone because of the time that you spend with them as well. So yeah, that would be my answer to that. I hope that's sort of vaguely helpful.
Yeah, thank you.
Cool, and great question, Tess, because George Hogg, when we were talking about him, and Tom Walsh, I taught both of those when they were little. George started off on tenor horn. He used to come around to my house carrying a tenor horn and open the case, and it would fall on the floor just so he could try and get out of his trumpet, of his tenor horn lesson. But he always says to me that the most important thing is like the gig etiquette. So there are things that happen when you go on a gig which you kind of don't really know about, and I'm sure Callum's got a few of those choices. Yeah. Maybe when not to talk to fixers about cash, and what not to do when you're in a big band setting. Have you got anything like that, Callum?
Yeah. So I guess the main one is don't ask any questions if you can avoid it. And this is because when you are in a professional setting, generally there's a clock on. Generally whatever's going on, if you're in a studio, your client is paying for the musicians and paying for the studio by the minute, or actually it's by the 3-hour block, but the studio itself is by the minute and the musicians are by the 3-hour block. But in that context, if you're the person sort of sticking your hand up and saying, "Where's my pencil?" That's actually incredibly stressful for whoever's running the session. And I've been on both sides of the glass, both as a musician working sort of for somebody else and directing the sessions myself. And it's such a high pressure situation, and your brain's only got room for so much stuff. really want to keep, if there's something that you could use your intelligence and intuition to figure out for yourself rather than bothering someone about it, that's what you should do. In the kind of film session world, it's you wouldn't be, as John sort of alluded to, you wouldn't be asking the fixers on the day sort of, what money are we getting? Because the fact is they probably don't know yet, because you only really figure that thing out at the end of the session, because various things that can happen in the session will change the rate of scale that you are paid. So you're on a base rate when you go in, but if they ask you to record over something you've already recorded, you get another fraction. If they ask you to play a second instrument, you get another fraction. If they ask you to play something kind of specialist, like a jazz solo or something, you get another fraction. So they really don't know before you've done the session, and it's a really unhelpful question to be asking them. But you don't know that until someone's told you that, of course. So and then I guess another thing is just never be late. It's again, for the person at the front of the on the podium or in the box, it's a really stressful day and it's costing them a hell of a lot of money. And if you are, let's say you're the third trumpet player and there's an empty seat at 9:58 and the session starts at 10, that empty seat is going to be causing them a huge amount of stress. So even if you turn up at 9:59 and you're still there just about on time, it's the worry that you're adding by doing that is just a huge it's a huge imposition on them, because you really want to make sure that whatever you do, you're making your fellow musicians feel comfortable. And that applies to the kind of conductors and to the producers and the fixers as well. And I'm quite bad at timekeeping personally. I tend to, if I don't plan ahead, I tend to be late for things. So what I do when I've got a session is I write the time in my diary an hour earlier than it actually starts. And then that's the time I aim to get there for. And then I set my stuff up, I go away and get my breakfast, and then I come back at sort of 9:45. But because my stuff's already in the chair, they know I'm there, so that they don't have to, they're not going to be worried by my absence.
Yeah, it's very cool, Callum. I think that applies to everything, whether you're going into maths, law, physics, maths, whatever, music, medicine, you just make sure you get your professional hygiene sorted. George, I think you might have a question for Callum.
Yes, I do. It's about how you arrange like the music for like Louis Downsole and stuff like that. So how would you go about giving like the trumpets one tune and the sax is another bit of the tune, and then like putting a solo in here, like if there wouldn't be like that in the original, if you get what I mean?
That's a good question. Well, part of this is sort of creative decisions. There's infinite numbers of ways to arrange any given tune. So ultimately, some of what you do is down to personal taste. But I doubt that's a particularly interesting answer because it's so fluid and a bit kind of wishy-washy. So I'll give you a more kind of direct answer. A lot of it is to do with instrumentation, timbres, and where the instruments ring at their clearest sort of volume and register. So let's say I was doing a trombone melody in the big band, right? I'm a trombonist after all. I do like to do that from time to time. Although you get a lot of trombone melodies in classical music that are in this kind of register, and so forth. It's all very low. If you try writing a trombone there in a big band on the melody, you will not hear it, or at least it's not going to be that clear. Because you've got the drums going all the time, and the drums are occupying a very high frequency with the cymbals and a kind of mid frequency with the snare and a low with the kick drum. and you've got the bass going all the time. The bass is occupying that low frequency. So the only way you really can have a low frequency melody in a big band, in my opinion, is if the bass is doubling it, or if there's very, very little else going on. You know, the drums are playing like just closed hats on their own, or the horns are tacit, it's just the upper register piano. You really need to make space for that. So if I was writing a trombone melody, it would have to be somewhere kind of between middle C and sort of top B flat, top C, that kind of area in a big band. Saxes have a rather larger range, and they kind of ring clear, again, sort of from that G up to kind of that F, the saxes are ringing nice and clear, and you can hear them playing nice and beefy. Trumpets is higher still, so anything from kind of this G up to the top C, I'd be comfortable with trumpets being the tune instrument in that area. So I'll kind of sketch out how I envisage the melody being split between the various sections based on these kind of register things. And I think it's really important to make space for things. One thing that I always tell students of arranging actually is that when you are harmonizing something, let's say you've got, you don't want to over muddy it. Basically, you've got like, the big band is a fantastic group because most of the instruments are in exactly the same register as one another. Most of the instruments, and I don't mean in terms of the absolute notes they play, I just mean in terms of the kind of sounds they produce. They're all kind of a sort of mid to treble mid sort of sound. They're all in that register. Even the bass trombone and baritone, they're not like a sub bass instrument where the other instruments can kind of sit on them like a cushion. They're still more kind of punchy than that. So you have to be really when you're writing for it and the whole thing's a block, it'll just hit you, it'll punch you in the face and it sounds absolutely tremendous. But if you've got 3-4 ideas in various different sections going on at the same time, because all the instruments have a kind of slightly limited range of sound to them, they can start to bang into one another and it becomes difficult to hear any particular idea. So what I like to do if I've got, say, a trumpet melody and a sax counter melody is I'll only harmonize one of the two. I won't harmonize both of these melodies because if you do, both of all that information starts to sort of overload the senses and you find it a bit difficult to hear the exact, you find it difficult to hear the ideas that you've got. That's sort of that's a slightly more helpful answer, I think, than it's my creative choice and I'll do what I like.
That's brilliant. Well, we've got some killer singers with the band at the moment, Erin and Anissa, and all sorts of people really like to have a sing with the band. I know that you've worked with incredible people like Jamie Cullum and Claire, obviously, and working with singers can be a really interesting, but also a really challenging thing. Erin, or Anissa, have you got something that you would like to ask Callum?
Yeah. My question is, who are some of your favourite singers to listen to at the moment, and are there any of them that you are planning on working with or would really like to work with in the future?
Great question. Among the greats, the kind of the musicians who are either no longer with us or almost no longer with us, I think my favorites are Sinatra, who's just got this wonderful voice that can really tell a story. Ella Fitzgerald and Mel Torme, as well as Philip Bailey, who is the lead singer with Earth, Wind and Fire. I think that stuff's just marvelous. And other jazz singers I really, really like. There's a New York jazz singer called Gretchen Parlato, whose stuff's really cool. In terms of people I'd like to work with, I mean, I'd like to work with anyone who'll have me, really. If they're a good singer and their music's good, I find that sort of project, a creative jazz project with vocals, to be pretty much the thing that I like to do the best out of all the arranging that I do, because it's possibly the style with which I'm most familiar. So it's the thing that fits my kind of skill set the most effortlessly, if you like. I love working with Claire. She's fantastic. Leanne Carroll is fantastic as well. I don't know if you've heard of her, but she's another great British songstress. She's a great piano player too, really funny, kind of engaging entertainer as well. Joe Stilgo's another one. He's brilliant. He is another piano playing singer who's just a really incredibly talented guy. Any of these people I'd love to work with. Of course, there's Americans as well, and maybe one day Michael Bublé or Harry Connick Jr. will call me up, but I think Harry Connick Jr. does most of his own charts, so there's not much chance of that.
That's very cool. I mean, my favorite is Lady Gaga and Tony Bennett. I mean, I just love that mashup. So maybe one day when Erin's top of the billboards, she's going to be like, yeah, giving you a quick call and saying, I've got this crazy Jessie J type song. Would you do an arrangement for strings and big band, which would be super cool. Erin, was it anything?
Yeah, bring it on.
Are you cool? Are you happy with that?
Yeah, thank you very much.
Thanks, Erin. Let's go to Ollie Young, because Ollie Young is a...
Yeah, thank you very much.
Thank you, Erin. Ollie Young is one of our guitarists who has recently discovered singing while he's playing his guitar. I don't mean singing a melody, but singing jazz lines that's going on. Ollie, have you got anything interesting?
Yeah. Well, I was going to ask, because I'm like writing some music for myself at the moment. So I was going to ask, when you're writing music, like what do you do if you hit a roadblock and just can't think of what to write? Because that's happened to me quite a lot of times recently. Like what's a quick workaround to that?
That's a really good question. And the best thing to do is, if you hit a roadblock, don't keep banging your head against a wall. Just stop, go and do something else and come back to it. Maybe even come back to it the next day if it takes you that long. You'll find that a fresh perspective gives you a huge advantage. I don't like to work in kind of groupings of longer than a couple of hours at a time. I like to work for a couple of hours, take a half-hour break, come back and do another couple of hours, and do that 3 or 4 times in a day. So I feel that I'm most productive if I do that. Other people are different. Some people just like to kind of be, blitz it and get through 15 hours in one go. But that's never been me. I find that frequent breaks, go outside, go for a walk, go and get some water, play some computer games, whatever. It just take your mind completely somewhere else that's not related to music and that's not related to anything that's going to kind of rile you up. Don't read the news or anything that might make you angry. Just do something that's completely divorced from the musical activity and from any other activity that's going to engage your sort of amygdala, sort of emotional systems. And then when you come back to it, you'll really feel like you've had a proper break, and hopefully you'll have some new ideas that sort of come naturally. I don't really have any kind of quick fix solutions. Sometimes you'll be stuck on something and you just won't be able to figure out how to continue, and other times you'll write a tune and it'll pop itself out in half an hour and you'll be like, oh, okay, there's a new tune then. It's kind of hard to predict how these things are going to work out, but yeah, I'd say that breaks often, and keep hydrated as well. Just drink lots of water. That's also helpful. If your brain's sort of in full functioning condition, then you're going to be working better. And if your brain's not quite there, if you're tired or if you're doing anything that's not quite right, it's good to take a break and make it right.
Yeah, really sage advice from Callum, guys. Thanks very much. From our point of view, that a lot of that applies to essays that you're going to be writing at uni as well. Sometimes you'll start an essay and you'll just get a block. I mean, I remember when we were doing essays about Stravinsky and I wouldn't know what I was doing. And so you kind of come back and start all over again. And, I'm sure Callum had the same sort of thing when he was doing his class at Oxford. Sometimes it works, sometimes there's a block.
Yeah, absolutely.
Stu, have we got anything else lined up?
Yeah, Lucas sent through a good question. I don't know if he wants to ask it.
Don't come on screen, Luca.
Yeah, hi. I was just wondering if there's been any big regrets or any decisions that you've in your life that you thought you could have done differently in terms of your career or anything.
No, not really. No, I don't really. I'm quite fortunate in that regard. I don't really dwell too much on the past or the future. I'm quite a present-focused sort of person, and are there things that I could have done differently? Probably. Do any of them spring to mind off the top of my head? No, not really. I'm sure that if I was pressed into thinking about it, I could work out various points in my career where I could have done something that might have meant it went a slightly different way. But I think that you can spend a huge amount of time dwelling on that sort of thing and just therefore being paralyzed by indecision and not actually getting anything done. Remember that ultimately not doing something, choosing not to do something is still a decision. It's just a decision of inertia, which is sometimes even worse. So it's better to act now, and if you end up regretting something later, so be it. You'll learn from mistakes just as much as you learn from successes. I think I wouldn't worry about having major regrets about things. Certainly not at this stage. I mean, of course, if you're going to spend £3 million and bet it on a horse, then don't do that. But there's some, still be sensible. But I think that it tends to be good to be to try things out, and if they don't work, they don't work. You haven't really lost too much.
Yeah, very good advice. Luca, don't worry, you won't make the wrong decision. We know you're a good lad. All right. But interestingly, when you were saying mistakes, I was talking to Ben in his lesson earlier this week, and Ben was talking about what happens when you have an absolute car crash. When you were maybe a little bit younger, before you'd really started making it with Nigel and things, did you ever have a disaster where it just went wrong? You fell over, or you smashed your chops up, or anything. Did you ever have one of those moments?
Oh yeah, and like to be perfectly clear, we all still have those moments now. No musician ever, no matter what stage they're at in their career, doesn't have an off day. And especially when you're given something that's sort of really demanding, or that doesn't quite fit with how you would want to play, or has been written by someone who doesn't have a clue what they're doing. You will sometimes have a day where you're just not feeling it. And my dad, as well as being an amateur violinist, was a heart surgeon. That was his day job. He cut people's chests open and operated on their heart valves, taking them out and putting new ones in. And ultimately, I've always sort of been of the opinion that whatever I do wrong, no one's going to die. You've just got to sort of have a slightly bigger picture mindset. If my dad had a horrible day at work, that would be a very, very bad day for somebody else. If I have a horrible day at work, what happens? Well, like this happens. And that's really annoying in the moment, but if you let it get to you, it'll make it more likely to happen in the future as well. And it's not, you should try and basically, I think that the Stoics had it right. The idea that you should remind yourself of what is actually possible, and how what seems like a disaster in the moment might not be so bad, sort of in a bigger picture sense. I think that kind of really helps with getting on with things and not being too worried.
Yeah, brilliant. Absolutely. Well, I'm going to start wrapping it up. I don't know if there's one more last question, Stu, that might be appropriate.
Yeah, one that got sent in. This was, I can't remember who sent this in actually, but it was just whether you had anything in the pipeline that you're really excited about at the minute. So just something you've got lined up, it's coming in, that you're working with or playing or writing, like John says, that you're just really excited about, excited for people to hear.
Two things. The first one is a new album that we're making, Louis and I are making. Can't say much more about that for the time being because we're doing a big reveal and a big announcement and stuff, and it's and we don't know how long it's going to take, but it will happen, and it's going to be awesome, and that's a thing. The second one. Some of you might know that Louis and I released the Ultimate Big Band Toolkit, sort of maybe December-ish, maybe November, late November, early December, whenever it was. So that's gone really well. We've been really happy with the response. People seem to like it. So we're doing another one. And this one, so the current one is sort of aimed at Louis and I before we went to Nijo. That's kind of the difficulty level, and there's some really, really hard stuff in there that is just fiendishly difficult. But we kind of said at the start of the project we really didn't want it to be easy because we wanted people to have something that they could work on. The feedback that we've got from it has been generally positive, but some people have said that it's too difficult. So we're making another one, and we're focusing on a kind of level that is just, it's slightly lower than the full professional level. It's kind of an on-ramp from being at a kind of intermediate level to getting up to the level where where you're at the full professional bit. It's sort of moving from the sort of regional youth jazz orchestra to the national youth jazz orchestra sort of level. That would be where we're aiming it at, I guess. I've written 9 out of 10 of the tunes for it. We're recording it over the next couple of months, and we're hoping to release that pretty soon as well. We don't have a title yet, so if any of you have any bright ideas, please tell us. But yeah, we're really excited about that because I've found that when I go and tutor big bands and things, it's quite hard to find repertoire that's at kind of a good level for them, and it's writing things that are specifically designed to challenge that specific level of players is a really good thing, I think. So we've got the solo features on the first instruments are at that kind of entry level, grade 5, sorry, not grade 5, like Nijo entry level kind of level. But then the lower parts in the section, sort of third trombone, third trumpet, second tenor, those sorts of things are more kind of grade 5, grade 6 sort of level, so that you can play them with any band or any band that's at that kind of level. So that we're very excited about that.
That's very cool. And in fact, when we do know when Cal and Louis launch their next album, we'll get them bussed together and we'll come down and be the audience for that one. That'll be an absolutely epic road trip.
Yeah, please do.
Very, very cool. Is there anybody in the band who would like to say one last thing before I start wrapping it up? As I wait for the silence is golden. Nothing from Harris, nothing from Ollie, Fitz.
Does anyone have any trombone questions? We haven't had any trombone questions today.
Wait, I've got one, but I don't know if you've got to answer. Have you, like, I was wondering about, polyphonics, not polyphonics.
Multiphonics, yeah.
Yeah. I saw a couple of videos on the internet about that, and it's just been on my mind. Like, how do you do that? And can you give us a demonstration?
Right. So you basically you play the note. So bottom B flat, whatever note it is. Then you sing the other note that you're trying to fit in. And then the third note of the chord just sort of happens by a sort of sympathetic vibration. So let's see if I can do this. I don't do this very often. There you go. It's that sort of thing. So you're singing a note, you're playing the other ones, but I'm really it's not something you can it's not something you use very often, but it's a really cool effect. If you haven't seen it before, there's a video of the Australian trumpet player called James Morrison playing it's a blues. I think it might be Things Ain't What They Used to Be. And he starts it off with a huge multiphonic cadenza on the trombone. It's really
That's
cool.
really good.
Yeah.
And
That's
you
cool.
can only play them on Yamaha instruments.
Yeah.
That's true.
Well, guys, on behalf of the band, I'd like to say thank you so much, Callum, for giving up your night tonight. It's been really exciting and totally informative. And I'm sure you'll say hi to them if you see them in the street and they go, "Hello, you spoke to me." I'd also like to
please do.
To Jeremy and all the team at Yamaha for putting this together. It's been absolutely epic. And we really do think that yourself and Louis are two of the brightest lights in the world at the moment for playing and arranging. And we can't wait to come down and see you guys do a live gig. So on behalf of everyone, big wave and say thank you very much. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone. It's lovely to chat.